Welcome to Self Perfected.
There we go.
Hello.
Hi.
It's weird that we're already having a conversation and then like we start the recording and then we're like, hi, how are you?
It's because we're performing now. This is a performance.
Yeah, we were just talking about home defense options.
Yes.
And we were debating the merits of a flamethrower for home defense.
And, I think it's a really good idea.
I did the pros and cons list, and I only had one con, burn your house down, but I had a lot of pros. So obviously that's how you make the decision.
That's what we're going to get.
Like, clearly.
Yeah, that's great. I've been looking at a lot of, so it has nothing to do with flamethrowers, but fiery personality, Bill Gates.
Ooh, yeah. That's not really how I would describe him, but
no, I was reading Hard Drive, and it's such a good book. He has this phrase in there that has been repeated, and it's "we set the standard," and it's really cool because even as they were not seen as a big company, even when they were doing millions in revenue, they weren't seen as a big company at all by like IBM or any of the other computer companies that are just like, oh, that's a fly by night. Xerox is like, no.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because he would look at everything else that everyone is doing as far as the software and all that. And he was just basically saying, like, how do we get out there first? How do we get out there and spread to everybody so that we set the standard? And he was really serious about it, obviously, and he took it really seriously, and that intensity and everything really I guess helped cultivate that culture around him, so that everyone that he worked with, because he was talking about some guy who was at I think Carnegie Mellon is maybe the school that he was going to, and he was working on one of the bigger computers that were like the size of a room, and he thought that was going to be the future. And Microsoft came to interview him at his school, or interview a bunch of kids, but they wanted to interview him specifically, and he was not interested in it until they sent him a letter that said, hey, we saw your credentials for school, you're graduating this year, we want to interview you. And when they spoke with him, he said, like, he was basically going to either work for Microsoft or some other big name. And he saw basically the culture at Microsoft, how everyone was just like, they would stay up late, they would excited to be there. They had this creative ability where they weren't basically told they had to wear specific suit and tie and everything. But he also said when he met with everyone there, everyone was super intelligent. Everyone there, like, it was part of the culture. It was part of the culture was like, no, we are on the cutting edge of everything that we're doing. And he could see, like, even if the pay wasn't that great there compared to other companies, apparently the pay wasn't great at Microsoft. But even with the pay not being so great, it was just the prospect of being on the cutting edge of everything in that industry. And he's like, if you visited Microsoft, you knew you were going to know what was going on before any other computer company at all whatsoever. Whether it was software, hardware, didn't matter. You knew what was going on if you were at Microsoft years ahead of everybody else. And that's what was like the great allure for a lot of talent there. And I guess I was just bringing that up because I was just seeing kind of the parallels of like what we're doing. It's like, we're on the cutting edge. We're setting the standard. Like, if you look at what everyone else is doing as far as in education, just as a general industry, it's nowhere near what we're capable of, and and here's the big thing about like what Microsoft did is originally they were just producing languages, which I don't want to get too technical with it, but I think everyone today is kind of familiar with an operating system with like, if you have a Mac, your operating system is probably a Mac OS. I don't know.
Oh, you lost me. You lost me. Slow it down. Slow it down.
But if you have like a PC or whatever, your operating system is probably Windows, right?
Yeah.
Well, before then, like the operating system that Microsoft was using was just, hey, this company makes a decent operating system. We're just going to go based on their operating system. And if some other company makes a different operating system, we'll format our stuff for their operating system. And it was just basically the base layer of every computer. And it just so happened that the company that they were using as their main operating system that they were going to use to do an operating system for IBM dropped the ball, and it was up to Microsoft to like take on that responsibility. But once they did that, it was literally just like, oh, okay, we want everyone to share this same operating system, which makes it so much easier for us to create, more applications, software, whatever, because we already know what's going to be the base layer. So we already know how to communicate with that. And that got them into every freaking computer. That was the start anyway, right?
That's what he meant by set the standard.
Right.
If you think about it, it's like the standard.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so I was looking at that and just looking at how in education, like, and I know you've done this in like the red pill of education and other videos as well, plenty of times, but there's this saying that goes around that says everybody learns differently. Oh, the myth, number one myth of education, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, oh, everyone learns differently, right? And I was just kind of reflecting on that this morning of how if you look at a hose, right? Like a hose that you would garden with or water your garden,
a garden hose, if you will.
A garden hose. But a hose could be like, there's those flat hoses that the fire department uses that like a lot of water can go through them, right? And so you can have different hoses, but if you've ever had that experience where you've had like the hose was stripped or it didn't fit into the faucet or whatever, like you can't use that hose. Or even if you like somehow jerry rig it, the amount of water that you're going to get out the end of that hose is the pressure is not going to be right. It's going to be basically just trickling out, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes people say like people are like vessels, right? Like kind of like a hose, right?
They're like what?
Vessels, right? And if you think about it in this way of like the water is the information that can flow through you, right? But if you don't have the way to connect to that information and actually integrate all of it, you're not operating at your full potential, right? That would be the standard, to be able to connect to the information in a way where you can use it to the best possible ability, right? And that's essentially like what we're seeing is we have the way to really get the best out of someone or best out of information because you're actually able to integrate that information rather than just going based off of like, well, this is the hose that I got and it just doesn't connect like that. I gotta do this other thing. Like I gotta carry buckets of water to my garden, like imagine.
It reminds me of that meme it's about education, but it's like once half of the meme is the education system like back in like the maybe 1900s, and then the education system now, and it's literally the exact same thing. Like the classroom is exactly the same, the desks organization is exactly the same. And then even then the parallel of like, there's another one where it's like prison and school, and they put how they're set up. And it's so crazy. It's like the one thing that hasn't changed at all is education. It's how we educate people, which is like what you were saying, Drake, of like, we literally now have like the evolution of that. And it's like something that works much more effective. Like it's basically keeping up now with the technology that we currently are using in other areas, like whether it be phones, computers, and all that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
which is really cool.
Yeah. And that's really what's needed, I would say, as far as like, I mean, you look at the world today. I was having a conversation with someone. Cam, I was having a conversation with someone, and I was just basically kind of laying the foundation of like, hey, if you look at what kids are being taught in school, a lot of it is just classroom management. And they agreed. And I said, and you know, oftentimes kids aren't being taught the things that you would think that are important in their lives, right? They're like, even as far as math goes, okay, they learn math. That's pretty important. But outside of that, what
Questionable whether they learn it.
Right. But what I was saying is that probably the most important thing for a child to learn is recognizing the letters and then being able to read, right? From there, everything else that's taught, like who cares about the French Revolution? Like how many times have you used that in your life and it's actually practical? Never, or like the War of 18, like it doesn't matter. It has no effect on my life.
It matters to the degree that you can understand reality. But in terms of a person's practical everyday life, if you think about what's the purpose of school right now, which is to prepare you to get a job, it doesn't really make sense why that is taught, because it doesn't help prepare you for the job you're going to have, where in your particular role in society, it isn't going to be relevant to you. I think there is relevance to learning that stuff. But if you don't have the processing ability, now think about it. So then you might ask, like, why is it taught then? Because if the purpose of school is just to create little robots, why are they teaching you about the French Revolution?
Right.
Because and this goes for everything you're taught from that perspective, like history and all that stuff. You're not actually learning history. You're being taught a story that has certain implications and has certain context that they want you to learn, so that it's like why did Jesus speak in parables? Why didn't he just say directly the point? Because when you give it in the form of a story, the person doesn't argue with the point. They just accept it. And then they hear the story, and then it's like a cool point. And then some people consciously are aware of what is being said, and some people are not, but it sinks in. And so like when you learn about the French Revolution, when you learn about different points in history in school, you're being told stories so that a certain underlying point is kind of put into you underneath the radar, so to speak. Do you see what I mean?
Because we're clearly not learning from our mistakes either. There's still war.
Right.
There's
that whole thing about history will repeat itself. If you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it. It's like, yeah. But if you really wanted to learn history, like, what does it mean, history? Even when we think of history, we think of it as a story.
Yeah.
But that's not history. It's like, if you wanted to understand the past, you would actually understand what people said and did. You would go back and read their journals. You would go back and look at receipts from transactions and like learn how the industry worked and stuff. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
You would actually understand what happened. And what happens is you have historians maybe who do that kind of thing sometimes. Sometimes they just are copying and putting together new stories based on stories, which is really what happens in most cases. But when you get to the point of school, you're just learning the story that someone else put together. Because like, think about it. I mean, just really, if you let's think for a second. Like, trying to think of an example. Let's say you learned the history of America. Okay. Now you learned a certain way, right? Now let's imagine that you're a kid who grows up in a school on a Native American reservation.
Hmm.
Okay. And maybe they just learned the same version of history, but just imagine for a moment they could teach whatever history they want.
So
Would they say the same story?
So a point to that, I remember I was giving a tour once in Washington, D.C., and I had a group that was from the state of Washington. And
I bet they were super confused. They were like, wait, how are we still in Washington?
they were super confused. I remember at a certain point in the tour, we went and visited a cemetery, Arlington National Cemetery, right? And I was giving them the history of how it became the National Cemetery. And someone raised their hand and they were like, but what about the natives that lived here before then? I was like, I don't know anything about that. Like that's what they wanted to know about. They were curious about, like, well, obviously it wasn't always, General Robert E. Lee who lived here. Like, who lived here before that? I'm like, I have no fucking clue.
It's like, that's not the story I want you to
exactly.
That's exactly that's perfect explanation of or illustration of my point. Like, this piece of land, here's the story that we want you to know about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, honestly, you should have said to them, well, why do you want to just go that far? Like, what about the amoebas that were crawling around, in the plankton and the algae and the microbes and the atoms?
Don't you care about these trees?
Don't you care about these carbon atoms? But that's the point, is like, we're creating stories based on objective things moving around and happening, and then we're contextualizing it with a story.
Yeah.
That reminds me of this point. Like, this is kind of a funny story. Last night when I was doing bedtime with the kids, I'm reading this we're reading like the robot books from Asimov, and we're at the second to last one. And in this, it's called Robots and Empire, I think, or Robots of Dawn. And it's this one, more than any of the others, is like kind of going into areas about like sex, and it's not like pornographic or explicit. It's just more like talking about how in this one planet they treat sex differently and like relationships differently, and like you can be married with somebody and then just dissolve it and then go marry somebody else, and it's not a big thing. People don't get divorced out of anger. It's like it's just showing like another society that has different rules because of a different environment, and they have a whole different structure of their society. But it's going into a lot of points about sex that are way outside of the context of what our kids have right now, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So I was reading it and I stopped reading out loud, and Max was like, what are you reading, or what's going on? And I said, oh, I'm just looking ahead. I'm reading ahead, because I can read that silently, just to see what it's talking about, because I could see where it was going. And I said to him, I'm not going to read this part out loud right now. And he said, well, just explain to me what happened. So I gave him like an explanation that explained the context of it without reading what the guy was saying. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's like, you can describe, there was a man who had a gun and went into a store and he was, shooting people and people were getting hurt. You could explain that, or you could be like explaining it like, it's a murder story where it's like, and he was hunting them down and gunning them and shooting them. There's a difference. You can explain what the point is. So I was explaining to him what the point was without the way it was explained, so that it wouldn't influence their understanding, right?
Sure.
And then I was explaining to him, as you guys have more context and as you get older and develop more context, you could go and read this, or we could read it again later. But right now, I'm just going to explain to you what it was. And so it was interesting because like later, Seneca was already asleep, and then Max was like just laying in my bed with me. He came and got nap head, and he was like, can you go back and read that? And I was like, no, I'm not going to read it right now. And he was like, well, he goes, you may not know this, but inside of me, I actually have a different organ that you don't have. Like that, most people don't have it. It's an organ, and it's the size of a microbe, and it gives me infinite context. And well, he said not infinite per se, but just like any context. It gives me any context, right? So it's okay. You can read it to me. And he goes, and you might wonder, where did I get this organ? But actually, Katie has this organ too. And so like when when I was developing in her womb, like I got that organ as well.
Whoa.
And I'm like, he just made up this whole
So after that,
story.
you read it to him, right?
No, I said, I understand what you're saying, Max. Like that's very clever. I said, but and then
That's really cool.
but then we read, then there was another book that we had not read. I bought for him. I bought it for us to read as like, because so we're not only reading science fiction. I bought Jack London. It's a book that has Call of the Wild and White Fang in it.
Oh,
So I was like, hey, why don't we read some of this? Because we haven't read this yet. And he was like, no, I don't want to read that. That's not, it's boring. But he was saying that because he just didn't want to, he wanted to read the other thing, right? And I was like, well, let's just read a little bit. Okay. He was like, okay. So I started reading out loud. And after I got to the first chapter, I'm like, all right, I'm going to take a break now because I'm getting really sleepy. And he was like, keep reading. Please, Cameron, keep reading. Keep reading. Just do 5 more pages. Just do 5 more pages. He like, did not want to stop reading it. And then this
That's
morning, he had bought some, because he has his own money, right? So he had bought these toys at Tractor Supply, like these 2 stuffed animals. One, they're like different, like one's a husky and one is a German Shepherd, right? And so at first he had named them White Fang and Buck because those are the characters in the story, because he'd actually already been reading those books himself,
yeah.
right? So he already kind of knows the story. And anyways, this morning I got up, and or when he woke up, he came and set up all his animals, and he had Seneca's as well because she has a deer and like a squirrel. And he goes, I gave them names, new names, and the husky, I gave him names based on kind of what they are. The husky's name is Cornhusk. And the German's name was Jim. We're like, Jim? And he goes, yeah, Gem. It's kind of like German, but it's abbreviation, Jim. And then he named the squirrel Squealer. And he named what was the other thing? The deer. He named the deer Rebecca. I don't know why. He's like, I think Rebecca's a good name for a deer. And it was funny, like he was just randomly talking out loud to us while like I'm making coffee. And he goes, what's great about having a pet squirrel is if you have a fruit tree, he can just scurry up there and get some fruit for you and bring it down to you.
So
He just
cute.
says things like that. There was this other thing he said, I'm trying to remember, something about context. I don't remember what it was right now, but we've got the train going off over here. But I mean, do you guys see what I mean about the history point? It's like I see value in history because it's just the way we're taught history. There is no value, really. You know what I mean? It's like, you know what it is? It's sort of like, it's just an analogy, obviously, but it's kind of like watching Disney, and then you find out The Little Mermaid was a Hans Christian Andersen story, and it's not the same story.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Where you're
Right.
like, oh, like she fucking turns into sea foam at the end. You know what I mean? Like this is not the same story.
Yeah.
So they're taking like a thing that's popular in our culture that we kind of all are aware of, or at least there's like a genetic memory, and then they're taking it and like turning it into a different story.
Right.
And like why is it that she doesn't have a mom? What is up with that? Why every Disney story, every popular thing like that, the kids don't have parents? Like there's a weird fucking thing there, right? So the story point is
it gets you
it's
to
like,
accept that underlying point of like you don't have parents.
well, let me ask you a question. Like, what did you learn about the French Revolution? Like, or what do you know other people are taking away from it?
Let them eat cake, and everyone was guillotined. And
See, I don't remember learning any of that about the French Revolution in school.
You don't?
No.
Here's what else I really vividly remember is that the French Revolution was basically like the French first helped the US in their revolution, and then they had their own revolution, something like that.
But in the way it's taught, doesn't it kind of make you think, or doesn't the average person takes away from it, or anybody really, just if you only learned it in school, don't you take away from it like they're kind of the same? Like they're equivalent. Like they're equivalent.
Guess.
And it was about equality and brotherhood and all of their stuff. And like it was like they had a revolution against their king, we had a revolution against our king.
Sure.
So like the way it's presented in school, it's like, because you're not given all the context, it's just kind of like, okay, yeah, so that was a good thing too. But when you actually start going and learning about what the French Revolution was, you learn it was actually the equivalent of what we would call a communist revolution.
Yeah.
It's more in line with like the Chinese Revolution. You see what I mean? Like when you actually go and study it.
Yeah.
And you might say, well, oh, but maybe that's what the American Revolution is. But actually go and look at what the people actually were saying. Like, what were they actually writing in their letters? What were they actually saying to each other? You see what I mean? Like, you actually go and look at the actual history of it, not just the story you're told. And that's the problem, is people, they're not even interested.
So I'm glad you gave all that context, because what I was bringing all that up for was really to more so, I was kind of feeling her out as far as like what she felt about that point. And she's like, yeah, I learned a bunch of useless shit. like, yeah, kind of like how today they're teaching kids they can be whatever gender they want. Right. And she said, well, that's kind of like a sore subject for me. Yeah.
Why?
Because her son is now identifying as a woman, right?
How old is the son?
He's like 20 or something.
Okay, he's not like 7.
No.
That would be interesting if this 7-year-old was like, I'm a woman.
I'm a
Not
woman.
a girl, like, I'm a woman.
With like a deep voice. I'm a woman. Call me Mrs. But yeah, and so it was interesting because it was here's the part that was really interesting to me. You could see that she was really emotional about it, and really just like it's still tough. And what I was saying was, well, I mean, yeah, obviously, like if people are influencing your kid to believe there's something that they're not, she was just immediately like, well, no, I don't think that we can tell them what they are or they aren't. They know what they
But
are.
you said it's your son.
Right. And it was just like this cognitive dissonance, obviously, right? Of just like, I guess, obviously, as the parent, what they tell these parents is, if you don't affirm them, that they will commit suicide or whatever, right? And so it's like, on the one hand, she's like, this is my son, and it's really hard for me to like transition that. And on the other hand, she's like, but I'm going along with it. I'm going, see, so you don't have to commit suicide. It's okay, right? And I guess I'm bringing all that into context.
If you think about it, it's so fucking self-centered, man.
As the person who's transitioning, yeah, for sure.
It's like they're just self-centered.
Yeah.
It's like, I will kill myself if you don't treat me like a woman. It's like, what is a woman? It's whatever I define myself as. Like, okay, like, what does that even mean then?
Right.
What does it mean? Okay, you're a woman, fine.
Just so
You still have
funny
a
though
dick.
too. Yeah, and it's also funny because it's like, even after they start identifying, these people are the most insecure, like low self-esteem. So it's this super illusory, like,
Yeah.
just, you're
Isn't
trying
it
to
obvious? Like, I know it's obvious to you, but it's like, it to everyone. Isn't it obvious that it's just a way of? It's like it's no fucking different than when you're feeling depressed and you go out shopping to make yourself feel better. Like, that's not going to solve the problem. It's going to temporarily give you some energy and you're going to feel depressed again. Or if you go out drinking and you have a great time and then you feel like shit the next day and it still sucks, it's just another
Yeah.
coping mechanism. That's all it is.
Exactly.
You know
Or
what
smoking
it
weed.
reminds me. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what
That's
it
a good
reminds
one,
me
man.
of, that I think is like really triggering, is same way of like, if you've been brought up with the idea that like, if you've been brought up with the idea that your race or your people, everyone is out to get and everyone hates and all that, every interaction that you experience where somebody is talking down to you or rude to you in any way, it's like it immediately becomes, oh, because of my race. And it's that same sort of insecurity.
See,
like,
now you know how it feels to be white.
what
Now
are
you
you
guys
talking
can
about?
finally relate.
What the fuck are you talking about, Cam?
You don't know what it's like to have everybody talking shit about you just because of your race. You know what I mean? No, but think about this. Like, here's the problem I have with it. Racism. Okay. All right. Was there a time when every news program, every book, every person was just walking around talking about how bad black people were?
Um, I don't know. I do know that there was definitely a time where, um, people were saying basically that they're a lower class and they're slaves, obviously, right? And so
Okay.
they're not as intelligent, whatever. That was the propaganda at the time. I don't know if it was.
But that's different than you're just going around saying that they're bad. Like, in other words, that was a how do I explain it? Because I know people would be upset, like I'm trying to justify it or something, and I'm not trying to justify it. It's like, you have a system that is based on inequality that requires slavery. So you have certain people that you are using as slaves who are accepting the point. And then as they transition out of that, they're like, well, fuck, these people are not, they're not in the same culture as we are. So we're keeping them separate. I'm not justifying. I'm not saying that's it's best. It's clearly not. But you can see how it's sort of like an evolutionary point. Versus if you look at right now, the artificial point of saying all white people are bad, you're all inherently whatever. And then it's normal to just go around talking about how like, can you imagine if you turn on Netflix, can you imagine it's possible there's probably 10 comedians on there talking about how white people are so dumb or bad or this or that.
Oh, for sure.
But you would not be allowed to do that about black people or anything else.
Right.
When in reality, people have been joking about that kind of stuff all the time. But
Right.
like politically, it's not okay right now.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
But there was not a time. I mean, I don't know. The thing is, it's hard to say because you don't know what was going on back then because you weren't alive. All you have is a story.
right.
And then you could say, well, but there was people alive back then, and they told me. It's like they can fucking lie too. They can take, you can take memories,
or they could have a
and you can
limited
make them-
perspective.
you can have a limited perspective, but you can take your memories and alter them in real time, or when you're forming them within a certain context. Like,
Yeah.
there's probably Germans who think Hitler was a good guy. There's Germans who think he was a bad guy. And you're like, well, is this person wrong? Is this person wrong? Like, there's people who think the earth is flat. There's people who think it's round, and everyone has their own different points. But you don't have the direct evidence of it. You don't have the actual direct point. So it's a story, and there's a starting point within it, which you're identifying with, that supports you to feel a certain way. It's not based on getting to the actual direct facts of the point.
You know that guy Peter Boghossian? I don't know how to say his last
Boghossian?
name. Yeah, that guy. But he brings up this question of like, first question that he brought up, or that's relevant to this rather, is the only remedy to past discrimination is current discrimination, right? And I guess he brought this up when like the trending topic was whatever.
But how is it discrimination?
What's that? To say that all white people are bad? Isn't that discrimination?
I guess what I'm trying to say is, it's like, can you see how artificial the discrimination is now?
Oh, and just to clarify, it's like, he's not saying that.
No, I know
is-
that. I know.
Okay,
I'm just bringing up the point about how people look at the past as discrimination.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, this guy didn't get a job because he was black, and they didn't want any black people. And it's like,
I mean, that is
that
discrimination.
anecdotal? But is that anecdotal?
It is.
Or is
anecdotal.
that every case? Was there no black people who could get jobs?
That is.
And think about
anecdotal.
this. Okay, let's say this. Let's say a guy from Mexico walks across the border, has no education, and he goes and he tries to apply to be the vice president of Microsoft.
Mhm.
And they're like, no, sorry, we can't accept someone like you. And then he's like, oh, because I'm Mexican, I don't speak English. Got it. It's like, no, because you don't have the fucking skills that we need you to have.
Right. And that's what I'm saying, as far as like, the insecurity that the
And
trans
how
people-
much of it was artificial,
Mhm.
like artificially imposed, not by the people in society, but more like how many people actually have a problem with each other face to face when they're different races?
Not very
Like
many.
depending on the context, obviously. Like when you get people into groups and there's a collective mindset, you see what I mean? And you can manipulate that. You know, and it's funny because it doesn't justify like what I'm saying is, okay, here's another example. Think about all the people who come from South America or Central America or Mexico up to the United States and work as like housekeepers, construction worker, or not construction, you know, contractor, stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah,
Isn't that basically just slave labor?
yeah,
I mean,
sure.
yeah, you're paying them, but they don't have a choice. Like, what else are they going to do?
right.
And we try to like make it some hero thing of like, they're willing to do the work, you're not. It's like, no, they're just willing to be paid less. And
It's
if
the
they
same
weren't
thing that
there,
happened
somebody
in-
else would be doing it and it would be able to have to get paid more.
It's the same thing that happened in Roman society where they just imported slaves, and it's just like,
Right. But notice we don't look at that and go, oh my God, can you believe like the racism and the slave, you know, the slavery of it?
right.
And it's like, what if there was a context to slavery that if you were to go back in time and you were to judge it according to how you judge Mexican slave labor right now in the United States, it would be like, okay, I mean, it's not about inferiority or racism or they're bad or something. It's just that these people have this level of education
Mm,
and there's no system in place to rapidly allow them to suddenly be equal in education to the other people that are here.
Yeah.
So it's just what's there. It's not, it to me, that's way more practical. Like, how often do you make a decision based on, I don't like the race of someone, but also if I act that way, it hurts me financially?
yeah.
Who fucking does that?
Yeah.
Like this, it's like, in the way I look at the way I see it is like it's this artificial point of amplifying that people have this hate inside of them and they just hate other people because of their race. And it's like, I have seen people utilize jokes and humor and belittlement and things like that in certain contexts. But at the end of the day, it's because of some fear point. It's because of some like group dynamic. It's not because of they actually know the person.
Right.
And they're just making the decision of, nope, you are different than me and I therefore hate you. It's
Yeah.
and even if they did, that just comes down to an education point.
Yeah. 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 For sure.
In fact, I was talking with Max the other day, like we were talking about something about fat people. I forget what the context was, but there was just this point that came up and it was talking about somebody in a fear of being fat or whatever it was. And he was like, you know, what are you talking about? Because I was talking about Katie. And I was like, oh, well, like in our world, in certain contexts, people, it's not that people necessarily think, although there's certain contexts where people do, but like in general, as a society, we look at people who are very fat. And what I mean is like very overweight, like much more than necessary, you know, as less attractive or less beautiful in terms of a societal standard than people who are not. And also there's practical points. Like if you're extremely overweight, that can be bad for your joints, your bones, your health. There's other points, but I'm just saying as an attractiveness point, is the way people look.
Mhm.
Right. And I was like, you know, I bet you actually don't care how people look, do you, Max? And he was like, no. And it was really interesting because like I forget what he said after that, but it was just like you could see he had never even considered, like he doesn't consider that. He's not looking at it like, is this person attractive or not?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like when Max is interacting with you, he's just interacting with you in terms of how you're responding to him.
Yeah.
It's not I like the way this person looks. And we
Right.
haven't ever impulsed or emphasized that. So I was just giving him context about how things are in the same context of how I'd say, like when we go to a restaurant, we have to keep our clothes on. Why? Because it's not because we're ashamed of being nude. It's because in our society, this is the collective agreement that we have. And there's other practical things. Like if you have no clothes and you're sweating and stuff, you're getting sweat and everything. And like, you know, your clothes like keep sweat and dirt from your body. And like, there's practical reasons we have clothes. It's not just to hide our nudity.
Yeah.
You know, but even if we didn't have clothes, I probably wouldn't just walk around nude. Like
Yeah.
even if we didn't have to wear clothes, even if it wasn't a societal thing, like there may be some cases if no one cared, you know, maybe you're at the pool or something, but like I probably wouldn't just be walking around the grocery store with my dick hanging out, like because it would be not sanitary. You know what I mean? Like whatever. You know what I mean? Because you're sweating and all that.
Did that
So
just touch the zucchinis? Was that
It's like-
you?
That's
I
not
saw
a
you.
zucchini, lady.
Oh, you've got gangrene.
Yeah, but anyways, my point is I was looking at that point, Max, like he doesn't like when he first met you, Drake,
Yeah.
his thought isn't like a black person. Is he okay? Like it was just like, he didn't even think about that.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? That's not even a point they consider at all. And it wasn't until they started to become more aware of like differences and they would ask like, oh, my skin looks like the same color as your skin, but Drake or whoever has darker skin. Why is that?
Right. He would
Like,
ask
why
that
does
all
this
the
person
time
have dark-
whenever
right.
we would go into the pool. He'd be like, and it's funny because it seemed like that was the first time that he would even consider it, is because my shirt is off. And now he's seeing the rest of my body and he's like, wait a minute, wait, why is your skin this dark and my skin's like this? What's that? And
But
you
it's
know,
like a physical observation. It's not
yeah,
a comparison based on like one's better or worse. And I was just looking at this point too, like if you think about, and why am I addressing the racism point again? Because it's like it's used as a way of like, it's an original sin that you can never be actually forgiven for, and it's
Yeah.
always going to be a problem, and we always have to base society around the fact that this is an inherent evil problem that exists in itself naturally.
Yeah.
And therefore we have to restructure society in a way to always manage that point that could at any moment rear its ugly head. And what I'm saying is it's just education. And so if you put racism, or let's just not even take racism, slavery in its historical context, like imagine you have a society where it's all people of one race. So they all look very similar. And then you like, oh, what was I reading, man? I forget what it was I was looking at or reading. And it was making this point about, or some video I saw, and it had nothing to do with slavery, but it was something to do with colonization or something. Oh, I remember what it was. It was this video of a rancher talking about why there were longhorns in Texas.
Okay.
And he was just making this side point. It was nothing to do with slavery, actually, but he was saying how, like, when Columbus and those people came over to, what we call America now, they needed like a workforce. And he said, like, when people would colonize different places, they would need a workforce because they couldn't physically build all the stuff themselves and harvest the things themselves. So he just made that point as to why they had the longhorns, because they're these physical animals that you can drive plows and stuff with, right? But then I was thinking about it like, yeah, if you go invade, some tropical country and there's no big animals like that, let's say, or maybe you don't know how to harness that or whatever, like you just see the people that are there and you're like, okay, I need a workforce. And these people don't have, now think if you went to that country and the people who were there had literally the same level of education and technology as the people trying to colonize.
Right.
Now they still need a workforce. So what would they do?
They would have to exchange, like,
they'd be like, yeah, like, okay, who can I, like, we have these jobs available, like we can pay you, whatever. We just need to, and they'd be like, all right, like kind of like more what China does in Africa, let's say.
Sure.
Of course, they're still exploiting currency devaluation and so forth, but it's kind of like they're not just going in there and enslaving them with whips. They're like, hey, we have construction jobs we're trying to do. We'll pay you, but it's really low wages or whatever. And so we don't think of it as slavery. But so what if you just looked at slavery back then in that context as literal? You can't, oh no, people were just really evil and just really, ignorant back then. And it's like, there were actually racist people. I'm like, yeah, these super fucking elite people who wanted to like control the population, the same people that exist now.
Right.
But the same people now that are telling everybody else it's the white people are racist and racism's a problem and we need to control speech on the internet. Those same people are the same class of people back then that would have been saying, yes, but the Negro has a different size skull and you have to see as an inferior and you're like, they're just trying to justify why they should remain the elite.
Right.
It's not about the average person who has a fucking plantation, just like any more than the average, middle class woman who fucking lives in the suburbs is racist because she's employing a Mexican or Dominican or Costa Rican housekeeper or whatever. It's like they found somebody who would work cheaply.
Yeah.
If somebody from Iceland, like let's say there was all these immigrants from Iceland and for some reason they don't speak English and they were all coming here and they were willing to work cheap, then you'd have fucking Icelandic housekeepers.
For sure.
You see what I'm saying? Now, I understand that the way that the racism plays into it is like because a person looks different, you can somehow, but I mean, that's not the underlying reason.
So there was this.
All that difference and stuff comes in, so you can justify subconsciously your guilt that you're taking advantage of the fact that this person has a lower education.
Yeah.
Because
So-
if you were to go to a fucking Microsoft and the head CEO was fucking Mexican, you wouldn't be like, oh, you clean my house? You wouldn't be doing that. You would be interacting totally differently with them.
Yeah. Yeah, for
You
sure.
know, remember that story you told about it was like, who was it? Like this guy who was going on a train or something.
Oh yeah. That was a story in Booker T. Washington's book.
Yeah.
Is basically it was a black guy, but he was so light in complexion that he could be confused for a white guy, right?
Uh-huh.
And so he was in the wrong section of, like, he was in basically the wrong train car, but based on appearances, he was like in the Negro car. And so like whenever a train conductor came up to him, or whoever's collecting the tickets, I don't know what they're called, but like they come up to him and they're like, hey, you know, they kind of want to say, you should be in a different car, but if he's black, then that would not be acceptable for them to suggest that he go into the white car. But if he's white, then it would not be acceptable for them to leave him there in that car. But basically, there was a lot of experiences where somebody with dark complexion skin was not treated as black because they were not of that class and they had
Like, explain
money.
that point. Yeah.
So basically, like someone from you know, one of the Middle Eastern countries or like Africa even, but like having money and being
Like
part
some
of,
prince or somebody
Exactly.
who's got like, they're not going to be like, sir, you have to go into the black section.
Exactly. It was just like, it was completely, it was made clear in what Booker T. Washington was writing, that it wasn't about the complexion of your skin. It was literally about the class that you were in. And so,
and that's the problem that the whole racism thing covers up. And this is my whole point, is like, we don't consider it like we're racist slave owners because we have Mexican slave labor, or, you know, South American, whatever, Central American slave labor that's working cheap under the table, kind of stuff like that. And you have all this going on that everyone knows about, but we don't consider that slavery.
And a few weeks back, I'd made this point, I think it was on a podcast, but of how the brainwashing is so effective that even those brain Washington, yes, yeah. How the brainwashing is so effective that even those who are promoting the brainwashing get brainwashed themselves. And because I was just thinking of this point of like, if you are
and imagine the guy in the train car, he's like, well, I don't agree with all this, he would be fired and they would find someone who would just go along with it. It doesn't mean the guy is racist,
right?
It's like this whole thing of like, yeah, anyways, go ahead.
So okay, what I was going to say is, if you feel that way inside yourself of like, oh, they just don't like me because of the color of my skin or whatever, it's like they got you with the brainwashing. You are part of the class system or the caste system, however you want to say it, right? The modern caste system, because then you'll feel either inferior or insecure or whatever the case may be, that you can't then go and do whatever thing that you think you're being prevented from doing. But
imagine if every like black family, like when they have kids, they never even talked about racism.
Yeah.
Like they literally were just like, okay, but let me give it some caveats. Like they never impulse that like, oh, you're going to be treated inferior because of your skin color or something like that.
Right.
And they taught like, oh, look, here's people like that look different and here's why they look different biologically and so forth. So they're aware of differences, and they educated them to be highly effective at reading, math, processing information, and so forth. And they didn't impulse them with a bunch of bullshit TV and entertainment that's like really ineffective patterns and so forth, right?
So no BET.
No BET. Yeah, exactly. Can you imagine if there was a WET?
That's the rest of the channels. Okay.
Not anymore. Now it's LGBTV. Okay?
That's true. That's true.
But you see what I'm saying? Like if that was done, so then the child goes out, they have a high vocabulary, they have a high self-esteem. And if someone were to say something like, can you imagine a person who's a high self-esteem, that they're naturally confident, they're very effective, they're friendly when necessary, but they can be dominant when they need to be, right? And that person goes out in the world and someone's like, oh, you can't come in here, you're black, or I'm not going to give you this opportunity. Why would that even occur?
Yeah.
That wouldn't even occur. The problem is when you have both sides of people or all people being brought up, being taught by their parents their inherent biases, and being told like, you're going to have to fight hard because of this or that, or you're going to have to do better, or what the fuck ever, because of, or people are going to treat you differently.
Yeah.
And all that does is it creates resentment and anger in the person. And so then you're always walking around looking for who's going to prove you right.
Yes.
So you're carrying that into everything that you do.
Yeah.
And look, all I'm saying is it's not about excusing anything that happened in the past, because I wasn't there. Maybe it really was what everyone says. And like white people just thought blacks were just inferior and hated them and like just disgusted by them. And like, that's what it was. And they enslaved them because of that. It had nothing to do with anything else. Okay. Or that was all a minor part of it. But the reality is that's not the world we live in right now. Do you see what I mean? And
Yeah.
why do we keep telling this story? Because you could say, oh, it's so we don't repeat it. But like, what was, like you were saying, Christine, right? Like, it's still fucking repeating.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, like we're
It's
not
like
learning from our
I
mistakes.
thought like after the 90s we were done with racism.
Yeah. And then like we were bringing up that good point of like we don't actually know, because that could be just one isolated incident of maybe there was a really white supremacist slave owner that did
Right,
treat
exactly.
their slaves poorly.
And they did think that way.
But then at the same time, like a common theme within all these, like for example, the blacks maybe then coming from Africa, and then also the similarities of Mexicans coming to America now, it's like maybe there's also an opportunity moment where it's like they would rather come to a different country, America, because living in that condition is actually better than where they're being brought up, because they would then be subjected to, like for example in Mexico, it's like robbery and kidnapping, like that's so much more, and then it's so much harder to actually like lift out of the your economic condition, versus like if you come to America and start in this like lower, you have that better opportunity. So maybe that was also the case back then, where it's like people in Africa weren't able to, because of their whatever lifestyle that was there was no opportunity there. So it's like you were maybe better off coming to America. And look, and like how many of those people, like you said, are still in that there's no more slavery here. So it's like you now are in America, like being able to live a certain lifestyle. So but we just don't actually know.
Another point is like, because a lot of the people who argue for like, oh no, it really was racist, they argue about like the laws that prevented black people from owning certain things and all that stuff. And I'm not
Like
denying that
redlining.
existed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not denying that existed. But here's the real question: who fucking was writing those laws? Who like, and it's, you might think, oh, see, because the society was just so racist, they just all. But like, when was the last time you voted on a law?
Yeah.
Like, how often do you do that? Like, and I know there's like proposals and people can vote on things, certain things on, but it's all influenced by marketing and public relations and all kinds of shit. Yeah. So back then, what do you think the odds that the average person was voting or had any fucking clue what laws were being passed before it was done?
I mean, the average person wasn't really reading either, much like today. You know?
So if you think, like I was talking with somebody the other day about this, like, what percentage of, I mean, I'm just making this up, but like, what percentage of people do you think actually agree with sending all this money to Ukraine?
I couldn't imagine a lot of them.
Maybe if we're just being generous, it's half.
I think that's very generous.
But maybe there's a lot of people who are just buying into all the propaganda and they actually have thought, okay, it's a good idea because we need to help them.
Also, I think probably a lot of those people would not think of that as a good idea to do until like it's already set in motion. Like, you know, oh, somebody tells them, hey, we're sending all this money to Ukraine, you know?
But I'm just saying, even at that point, let's just say it's half. I'm guessing it could be more, it could be less. It doesn't really matter. A lot of people would disagree. I think that's safe for us to say, right?
Sure.
But so why does it still happen? Like, isn't it pretty obvious whether you like it or not? It doesn't matter. The decision's out of your hands.
Yeah.
Even if, don't you agree? Even if 99% of people disagreed,
Yeah.
because without the propaganda, I guarantee you, and with the truth of it, everybody would disagree.
Yeah.
If you actually start looking
100%.
into the facts of it, every reasonable person would disagree if they actually could look at the facts. So even the people who disagree or who agree with it, they're agreeing with it. It's like what can I say? It's like you know that meme where it shows the guy about to stab somebody, but then you see the other part of it, and it's like actually it's like, I'm trying to remember what the picture is. Do you know what I'm talking
I
about?
do not know this meme.
It's like a cartoon. It's like I've seen it on Facebook. It's like a cartoon of like a guy like stabbing a guy, but then when you zoom out, it's like that's not actually what's happening. It's like something else is actually happening. And it's like the opposite of what you think or something. I'm
gonna
trying to.
look
It's
this
like a
up.
really weird, crude cartoon.
Mm.
Hold on. Let me see if I can find it. Meme guy stabbing.
I know there's one that it's like a sheep drowning and it looks like the dog or the wolf is going to kill it, but then the dog's actually trying to save the sheep. When you actually look at the greater context of what was going on. I don't know.
It was, I think what it is,
that.
it's like it looks like this guy's getting stabbed, but when you zoom out, it's actually like the heel of it's like a shoe, and like it's actually this guy trying to hurt the guy, and you're just seeing the shoe. It looks kind of like a pointed knife or something that was coming at this guy, but actually he's trying to hurt the guy who's running away. And so what you think is the knife is actually the guy's foot, like, running, and he's like running or something like that. But my point is, like, people only see the one view because they're like on TV. So they're seeing like Ben Stiller meeting with the president of Ukraine, and they're seeing like and y'all remember in the beginning of it, there was all these like videos on YouTube of like the Ukrainian fighter ace who mysteriously shoots down 20 Russian jets, and it's like the tanks rolling in, and it's like, all of that was fake. All of it was just old footage of other things out of context, just put into the viral point to like impulse everybody to like think a certain way about it from the beginning, right?
And they always say whenever there's like anything like that, like by the time the news organizations call it back or stop whatever they're doing, like the point was made. And so it doesn't matter.
Right.
Like,
it doesn't, yeah.
Same thing with like Hunter Biden, when that was all coming out, and all like Twitter,
it was something like 30% of Democrats said they wouldn't have voted for Biden if they had known about it.
Right.
And it's like people were screaming about it, but like it wasn't getting through to those people who that was on purpose.
Yeah.
It was obviously, like, clearly, and they were hiding behind the fact that it was hacked material or this or that. It's just like when they shut Jordan Peterson down or anybody else, and they say, we're, community guidelines, you're not allowed to attack or harass somebody on the basis of their gender. And it's like saying he, when they prefer to be a she, is attacking them and harassing them.
So that's my second question. Question by this Peter guy, and this will help us like move forward. Is the second question that he had is speech violence, or speech is violence? Agree or disagree? Right. And there was something brought up that was really interesting in that conversation of just like, okay, you could say that certain things that you say cause other people to cause harm, right? But the speech act in itself is not violence, right? Is what somebody else was saying. And here's where I was going with this, where I see is that when you're speaking, somebody made this really great point. When you speak into a room that is empty, like no one's getting harmed. It's the conditions of the people that you put in that room, which either causes them to be harmed or not. And the counter argument to that is like, if you shoot a gun into an empty room, no one's getting harmed, right? But
then it's not violence.
Right.
Shooting a gun itself is not violence.
Right. You're right. And so that's
like if I cut a piece of leather with a knife, I'm not being violent.
Right.
If I cut a person, I'm being violent. It's whether someone's being harmed.
Right. Exactly. exactly. And so with all of that, what I was seeing within that is, um, obviously speech itself is not violence. However, the way that we
Actually,
think
I
of
think speech
things,
can be violence
here's what
because
I'm
what I
saying.
said was whether a person's being harmed.
Yeah, okay. Here's what I'm saying is that, well, because like you could also argue if you say
But the
something
question
to an
is whether someone's
unstable,
being harmed.
but if you say something to an unstable person, they could be harmed, right? Like
Sure.
they could be
No,
harmed
well,
by your words.
but then we have to be really precise about what we mean by a person can be harmed.
Okay.
And when I say a person can be harmed, it's like, okay, the only way I can see that in the general context of you're just talking to anybody,
Mhm.
that your speech can be violent is if you're lying to them to make them think that there is a dangerous situation to which they need to respond with violence.
Hmm.
Right. So if I were to say, like, hey, this guy right now is coming in here with a gun. As soon as he comes in, he already says he's going to shoot you. You better shoot him. And then he comes in and they shoot the guy. But
Yeah.
it was literally, I was lying.
Yeah.
I caused violence with my words.
Mm.
But that's a very obvious, I'm lying on purpose.
Yeah.
Right. And that was kind of what they were trying to get Trump with the whole insurrection thing. Was like he was lying about the election being stolen and then inciting people to be angry about it and to do something violent about that.
Yeah.
That was the whole big lie. That's why they call it that, right?
Sure.
But that's pretty obvious. Like anybody can recognize that. But saying that someone is a woman when they're actually a man, how is that causing them harm?
Wait. Saying that they're a woman when they're actually a man?
You know what I'm saying? Like they're saying they're a
Like,
woman, but
yeah,
or
they're saying
whatever.
they're a
Like,
woman and you call them a man.
yeah,
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah.
Okay.
How is that causing them harm?
Right. Well, but see, that causes them harm because they're unstable and they feel like you've attacked them because they're insecure
See,
or whatever.
but we're
right?
not. But here's the problem: where is the actual harm?
Here's what I see as like, because I don't see that as an act of violence, obviously, but what I do see as speech can be violent as, when we're not considering entire countries or not considering just like all life equally. And so the speech that the rhetoric that we have, the media that we have, I think that perpetrates violence because the way that the media acts is like, oh,
Like
everyone listen to this, everyone go get a vax, and then that causes harm, or everyone take this drug that causes harm. That in those ways speech can be violence because it's not
or telling a
considering.
person who has mental problems
Mhm.
that they can change their gender and everything will be okay. That is actually harming them
That is true.
because they're not learning the mechanics of how their mind actually works so they can stabilize themselves.
Yes.
They're just, it's like you're lying to them. It's like, hey, if you eat these Doritos, you'll feel better. It's like, yeah, for a moment, but ultimately it's really bad for you, like long term.
Yeah.
So that is like so the problem is they're trying to flip it.
Yeah.
They're trying to flip it and say that the harm is when you don't affirm the person. And so it's like we're then the real harm is in we're covering up the fact that people are not being supported effectively. And when I was saying words can be violence, like I would suggest that in the context of a child who's still in their natural learning ability phase,
Mm.
and you're telling them things that are not correct.
Yeah.
That would be, I would suggest, a form of violence.
Yeah.
Because you are now creating the instability within them that they're going to experience as an adult, which is they're going to experience constant harm.
Yeah.
Against themselves in their daily experience, and then they're going to harm other people because they're not able to do what's best.
Yeah.
And like you said this point in the very beginning when we started recording about like bringing out the best in a person.
Yeah.
And we tend to, I just mean us generally, we tend to have this definition of like, I'm my best. I'm the best I can be. Like it's this grandiose thing.
Hmm.
Like if I'm the best I can be, it's like this, I'm an amazing artist and I'm a talented dancer and I can speak like Martin Luther King Jr. and I can, you know what I mean? Like I can run like whatever the guy is, Usain Bolt, or you know what I mean? Like
Sure.
you're this amazing thing that's just
Yeah.
like way better than
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah.
But when I look at bringing out the best in yourself, it's bringing yourself to the point where the decisions you make are actually best for yourself and everyone else. That doesn't have to be grandiose.
Yeah.
Like being the best mom that you can be. You might think, oh, it's like she's doing this and this, and she has a career and she's got kids and they're doing this and all the like all these. She's just like superwoman. And it's like, what if literally it was just that, you know what? You didn't worry about the dishes being done today because the baby was crying and they needed your attention. And you needed to make sure that that was getting taken care of, and then you'll figure out the dishes later.
Yeah.
But instead of being like, no, we have to have a clean house. The baby can cry. You'll get over it. And I'm going to make sure the house is clean because I have the cleanest house in the neighborhood. Like that's not being the best. You see what I'm trying to, like what I'm getting at?
Right.
It's actually looking at what would be best in the context of the situation that's going on,
Yeah.
you know, and like
Yeah.
not putting your kids in school, but rather educating them at home yourself. If you have that practical option,
Yeah.
you know, don't sit them in front of the TV and let them watch Disney all day. You know, like one of the reasons why, if you just want to break down why our kids are so effective, it's like, you know what? Okay, let me ask y'all a scenario. Okay. When brother and sister start fighting, what is going on and what typically happens and what's the response and how does that play out in a typical
Interesting.
home?
Well, I did not grow up with a brother or sister.
But no, but what do you imagine? Like, what's the thing that's in everyone's
yeah,
mind as
definitely.
acceptable?
I would always
Hold
see
on, real quick.
parents.
You've never, obviously, I know you're a man, so I'm not thinking facetiously. You've never given birth and you've never been at a birth,
Right.
but don't you have a picture of what birth is like?
Yeah.
From what?
Well, definitely seen it on videos and stuff. Yeah.
No, but I mean,
And
like,
also,
have you seen movies where the woman's like, "You motherfucker, you did this to me," and like,
oh,
you know,
yeah.
like
Yeah,
everyone
yeah.
knows that, even though you've never seen that in reality.
Right. Yeah.
So what I'm saying is, you have an image of what is acceptable,
Yeah.
even though it's not. But I'm saying that's what you think is so. That's what I mean. Like, what's the image of what's acceptable, or what's the play out of brother and sister fighting?
It's definitely the parents step in. They're like, hey, you can't act like that. And like they're just yelling at the kids and they separate the kids. You tell them you're sorry. And they don't
Be
actually
nice to your sister.
Yeah, exactly. And they don't actually like consider what's happening or anything, or even what may have contributed to that child acting in that way in that moment, that sort of stuff. Is like, what's interesting is,
Well, hold on. I want to give you a scenario real quick.
okay,
before I
good.
go on.
Go ahead.
So I think everyone would agree, like that's the typical thing, right? And then you might be punishing them, might be sending them off. People might be spanking the kids, yelling
for
at them,
sure.
whatever, right?
Yeah.
But like, I'll give you a scenario that happened just the other day with our kids. Like, I was in the bathroom getting their toothbrushes like ready for like toothpaste and stuff, and the kids were in our big, master bedroom bed, and I could hear them having a conflict. Like Seneca was like not crying out of like pain, but sort of like a whining, crying, like something was wrong. And Max was like, Seneca, stop. And like I come in there and he's like punching her leg, like not hard, but like, hitting her on a leg, and she's like kicking, and they're like frustrated with each other, right? And I'm like, hold on, guys, slow down, stop, just move away for a moment. What's going on here? Okay. I said, if this behavior continues, we're just gonna have to go out of this room and we'll go into our other bedroom, because this is not acceptable. Okay. Like, I'm not saying we have to, but you have to stop. Okay. And they're like, okay. They stopped, right? Because you have to get the point to stop, right? So then I was like, okay, what's going on in here? Why are you guys like, why are you punching, Max? Why Seneca, why are you kicking? Why are you guys frustrated? And so Max is like, well, she was doing this thing and I didn't do it. And I'm like, okay, clearly you were participating. I saw you punching her. So I'm not blaming you. I'm not saying it's your fault, but clearly you were participating. He's like, well, I was like, you could have just moved away. She's like, I couldn't move away. I'm like, you could have left the room. He was like, well, but I wanted to be in here with you guys. I'm like, I understand that, but I'm just saying you were participating. Okay. Seneca, what was going on? Right. She's like, well, I was trying to be under the covers and Max was pulling the covers and was, and I could see what was going on. It's like she wanted to be under the covers, but he was like wanting to crawl around in the covers, and it was like moving the covers off and everything. And that was what created the conflict. You see, like so it's like I'm trying to do something and then this person's taking it away from me.
Mhm.
So she's kind of like trying to kick him to get him to stop. That leads him to being like, why are you kicking me? Like, and I'm getting frustrated because he was trying to, they're in their own worlds in a certain sense. Like they're playing
Sure,
their
yeah.
own games, but in the same room together.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, look, this is not effective. Like communication. Seneca, you have to say to Max, hey, Max, I'm trying to do this. I want to play. And then Max, you need to explain to her, hey, I want to play this way. And then, you know what the best thing would be to do is if you guys were to pull the covers up, and I showed them, pull them up all the way up on the bed. So there's plenty of covers. Because the thing is, they were falling off the bed and there wasn't much covers left. Right. And then as I did that, they saw like, okay, that would have been the solution. And then like, it was like Max looked over at, or Seneca looked over at Max. She goes, Max, can I give you a hug? And he was like, sure. And then she like leaned, she like rolled over and started hugging him. And she was like, I love you, Max. And Max is like, I like being with you, Seneca. And then it was like done. And I didn't tell him to do that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like it was like a spontaneous point. There was no, but what I did was explain to them the situation of why the conflict was occurring, help them see that, and then show them what the solution would have been. It's like they, in that moment, just let go of the fact that they would be blaming each other. It was like a miscommunication. There was a solution. Okay. So it was easy to be like, okay, let's just forgive each other and like move on.
Yeah.
And then it was done.
Yeah.
So there was no escalation. But as a parent, if I'm like, I just don't want to hear a bunch of yelling, I don't want to hear fighting. And the average parent would think that there's something special about the kids that they did that. Well, they just get along so well. No, they don't. Like
Right.
they don't get along in an unnatural way. Like Max is 5, almost 6. Seneca's almost 4. He's a boy, she's a girl. They have different interests. Sometimes they overlap, sometimes they don't. And there's going to be natural conflicts within that. Just like there's always conflicts between individuals naturally. Like you don't want to be doing exactly the same thing in exactly the same way. Right. But
Yeah.
and they're in their process of learning how to communicate that with each other. But because I didn't go into an anger point and a blame of one kid or the other, and like we never say things like, Max, be nice to your sister.
Right.
Or because
Like
she's
that's
more
such a
little, you know?
it's such a stupid thing to say.
Yeah.
Like, be nice to your sister. In fact, we don't say be nice.
Right.
And our kids know the difference. Like they'll say, oh, I was being kind,
Yeah.
even if they're not being nice.
Yeah.
Like they understand the difference, right?
And
I
I
forget
also
why we
noticed
brought that point up, but yeah.
you never like impulse them with like, you're just jealous of your sister. Oh, he's just jealous, or she's just jealous of him, or anything like that. Like you guys didn't start them off that way. And so that's something that a lot of parents do actually do, where, for them, their kids are, I don't know, acting in a certain way. And they're like, oh yeah, you're just being jealous, and oh, you've always been jealous of them and all that. And then the child grows up with this idea in their mind that they're jealous, and they start acting that out. They're living that, like that's their first
Yeah.
filter.
We don't treat them one special. Like yesterday, one of our friends, or like a neighbor in town anyways, they needed some help with something. Like they were looking for a horse on their property, and they had asked if anybody, like on Facebook, if anybody had a drone, and I happened to have one that would work. So I went over, so I told them, yeah, I have one. So they asked me to come over with it to look for the
Yeah.
horse, just to fly it around, because they have a big property, right? And when I was telling Katie I was going to go do that in the morning, Max was like, he wanted to go. And at first I didn't really want to take him because I figured it might be too much to direct of trying to do that. And then also it actually worked out really well. But eventually Katie convinced me like it makes sense. I was like, yeah, okay, it's cool. I just have to be stable with it myself and not project that it's going to be difficult if he's there or something. And it worked out really well. But then Seneca wanted to go, obviously, right? And we explained to her why she's not going to go. Like you, in this particular context, we need to be able to focus on this point. And Max is developing the point where he's not going to sit there the whole time and go like, okay, like after 5 minutes, look, can we go now? Can we do something else? Like, no, we're going to go and focus for like maybe an hour or two on this point. So so Katie was supporting me, like, bring him with you so he can practice that point. And so we explained to him, you're going to practice being there and not just asking to leave right away or after a few minutes or whatever, or at all. Like just practice as best you can being there. This is the purpose of why we're there. And it was actually really cool because when you have the drone and you have like the little, it's like showing you the screen on the phone, only one person can do that. Like 2 people, it's kind of, not even practical for two people to watch the screen because it's on a phone. You're holding it like this, right? So it was actually cool because he was with the neighbor walking around with her and stuff.
Hmm.
And they went like on a mile walk, like walking around, where we were while I was like looking at the thing. And then they'd come back for a minute and we'd look at it and we'd find another place to go and stuff. And it was so cool because like, it actually, he was supporting them to remain like kind of stable in the point instead of like, maybe potentially like being like anxious or whatever, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it was cool because when we were leaving, we like drove her, the neighbor, back to her house because they don't live on the property. And when she was getting out of the car, like Max was like, Ashley, can I give you a hug? She was like, oh yeah, sure. And she came back and he was like hugging her. And like it was just so genuine. You know what I mean? But like my point was, we explained to Seneca, like, we're not going to take you, not because Max is special or he's a boy or any other particular point, but because he is practicing this point and you're not quite there yet. So
Mhm.
there will be opportunities for that too. You see what I mean? So we're explaining to them the context. And I said, what if you stay here with Katie and you guys can do something together? Like you could bake some cookies or make something together. And she's like, oh, sure. And then she was like, done. You know what I mean? It's like, you can do something also. It's not like he gets to go do this thing and you just don't get to because whatever reason. So
Right.
it's not like we're always treating them the same. So you would think she could develop a point of jealousy towards that, but it's like we're explaining to them why, so they
Yeah.
can understand, because our starting point is not a point of he's special or better. That was just a practical consideration.
Yeah.
And so we explain that stuff. Like sometimes I might get I might be emotionally reactive to something, right? And I might react to something Katie wanted me to do or saying or whatever, and I react and we're arguing, right? And of course, what we call arguing, probably most people would not even think of it as an argument, but there are times where we react, right? And once the point is clear within the other person of like, okay, this is what I was going through and so forth, we'll bring it up to the kids. Like, hey, earlier when like Katie was saying that and I was saying this thing, like I was actually just reacting, and I was reacting because of blah, blah, blah. And it wasn't actually best. And now I do agree with her. She was right about that. And here's why, and so forth. So like they're seeing us admit, like, so we're not trying to create some false illusion in them that like we know everything. We
Right.
are always like, it doesn't mean that being perfect isn't a proper standard. It's just when we make a mistake, we're not trying to cover it up.
Yeah.
Of like, see, but we're still perfect because we didn't make a mistake. Like, no, we made a mistake. It was a mistake. And that's perfect.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? Like mistakes are going to happen. The self-perfection point is that you recognize the point and you don't lie to the kid and have them create this false view of you. So like, imagine there's going to be far less conflict within Max or Seneca or Caius as they're older and they don't have to go to that point of realizing, oh, Cameron and Katie don't know everything. Oh, fuck, like I'm lost in this world. Like they're not going to have to go through that. They're going
And
to
I think
develop
that's
their own self-confidence. Yeah, go ahead.
that's the point that you were bringing up, like between Max and Seneca, like having that fight is just that of like, you're not lying to your kids. You're not impulsing them in their first 0 to 7 years of just like how this is going to affect them later on. And that would cause violence, as we're saying, or cause harm really to them, because that's what they would be living out. That's what they would have to struggle with. And that's what everyone else does have to deal with.
And it's like
Is-
moment to moment, there's tons of these little tiny conflicts that are created. And it's
Yeah.
like, it's like planting a little seed in the person that starts to just create little bits of conflict. And you just have all these little points inside of the person where it just starts to accumulate to like, we talk about structural resonance, right?
Yeah.
It's like this point where some words have come to you and then it kind of vibrates in here, and that's a weak point, and it just makes your whole structure just like, whoa,
Yeah.
And that's really what it comes down to. Is so to the point where if somebody, like there was one day I called like the bank or something, and it was like Katie was on this particular account, but I didn't want to have to get her to do it because she's with the kids. So I just called them and they were like, what's your name? I'm like, Catherine Conklin. You know what I mean? Like whatever. Like I just said her name, or Cope, whatever, like I just said her name. And they were like, oh, okay. Yes, ma'am, or whatever. Right. And there's been times where there was some other one.
Yes, ma'am. Wow, she's got a deep voice.
And it's like, I'm not going to be upset. And I think there was one time I did it and they still said, sir. Like
That's
they didn't
hilarious.
even realize it was a woman's name or something, or I don't know. Like it was really weird.
Yeah.
But my point is like, it's
Hilarious.
a silly example, but my point is like, if someone were to say that, if they were to, based on my voice, be like, oh, yes, ma'am, like, because they couldn't see me or whatever,
Right.
maybe I would correct them. It just depends on the context, whether it matters or not.
Yeah.
I'd be like if I was scheduling a doctor's appointment, or maybe like, I maybe wouldn't worry about it.
Right.
I certainly wouldn't be offended.
Yeah.
I wouldn't, but I know when I was a kid, when I was like, I'm gonna guess 7, something like that, 6 or 7. Like I remember going to this restaurant one time with my mom and my little brother, and I was with my brother. He's 2 years younger than me, and he needed to go to the bathroom, so I was helping him go to the bathroom. Like go find the bathroom, and I went to the waitress, and I was like, "Where's the bathroom? Where's the restroom?" And she was like, "Well, your brother's is over there, and yours is over there." Right. And I got really, but not understand, like, I wouldn't say I was effeminate, but it's like, I was like, very like, I don't have a picture, but I don't look like, I didn't look masculine when I was a little boy. And I had also long blonde hair. Like my mom had my hair long. It was like a thing. Right.
Yeah.
And so, I was a very pretty child. Right. So whether you thought I was a girl or a boy, it's like I could see why you wouldn't necessarily know, especially if I had long hair. Right.
Yeah.
It's like sometimes people think that Seneca's a boy. I don't know why. Like, but
Okay.
that happens often where they'll think that she's Max's brother. I don't know why. Anyways,
I really want to see a picture of you with long hair. I want to see.
I'll have to find it. But my point was, in that moment, I felt very embarrassed. And like there was another time I remember where I was like do you guys know Fuddruckers?
Yeah.
Do y'all have that? Yeah.
We have that here in Florida. I don't think I've taken.
Kind of gone downhill, but I used to like that.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but with like hamburgers and hot dogs and stuff, right?
Yeah.
But they have these really good, like the hot dog buns are like not your typical. It's like almost like a toasted brioche or something. You know what I mean? It's like they're really good. But we went there for some kind of like sports end of the season party when I was very young, and I remember you had to give them their name when you placed your order, and they can only fit so many characters on the thing, or maybe they just misheard me, but instead of putting Cameron, they put Camaro, right? And then when they said the name Camaro, I was so embarrassed. I felt extremely embarrassed, and like no one else was even fucking paying attention.
Yeah.
But like, why was I embarrassed about that? Like, there's like a self-image point, like you got something wrong. Like, in other words, I can relate to that feeling, but it's a very immature point. Like if somebody called me Camaro Cope, I might laugh, like that's so silly. I'd be like, actually my name's Cameron Cope, you know what I mean? Like I wouldn't be like, I wouldn't feel embarrassed. It would just be like kind of funny, maybe, or maybe I wouldn't even give a shit.
I'm gonna introduce you as Camaro Cope at one of our huge events where we have a stadium. It's just like, and now
I'll just melt down.
You're Technotutor founder, co-founder, Camaro Cope.
But check this out. Like, remember, it was like, I think I was on the Monday, or it was a distributor meeting or something. I was introducing a new person, right? And I was thinking that this one person was the one who had invited them in.
Oh, right, yeah.
But it was actually the wrong person.
Yeah.
And I was getting it, and I think it was because their pictures were next to each other on Zoom.
Sure.
That's why I was immediately associating that person. It was just like a glitch, right? But I didn't get embarrassed about it. Yeah. They were like, because they were clearly like, why are you saying I did it? I'm like, oh, wait, who was it? Oh, it was so and so. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Because I don't have that embarrassment point in me. It was just like okay, it was a mistake. All right, next. I don't have that fear of making the mistake, of being embarrassed. So I've transcended that point within myself about being embarrassed if someone thought I did, you know what I mean? Like,
I think that's a huge point, because I think a lot of people, well, obviously a lot of people have that embarrassment point. Look at just how the masks were used, during the last 2 years, and like how it was just basically out of embarrassment. You would put on, or not you, but like the average person would put on a mask so that they wouldn't be shamed, and just like, oh, I don't want to feel embarrassed. Or even if they were to not put it on, they would feel embarrassed.
And isn't that probably very likely, going back to the racism stuff, why people would go along with certain things?
Right.
Because you might think like, see how racist everyone is, they all went along with it. And I'm like, that'd be
True.
like saying, see how retarded everyone is for like going along with the mask, when you know the average person was like, this is bullshit.
Yeah.
They were
of
just
course.
afraid of saying something because they didn't want to be against what the official point is.
Right.
Yeah.
They didn't want to be that guy.
And so my point earlier was, who's making the official decisions? Clearly not the average person, because then it wouldn't happen.
Yeah.
Everyone's going along with. So back then, even with whatever racism existed, whatever laws were being passed, it wasn't the average person agreeing with them.
Yeah. Yeah. Did
And
you
they
wanna
might even say
something?
publicly, like, yes, black people are bad. But
Yeah.
that's like saying the average person going like, yes, you should wear a mask, but you don't know what they actually think.
Right.
You don't, because if you get them when there's no consequence, then they'll admit like, yeah, I mean, it doesn't make sense, but you know, what does it matter? What's the harm? You know what I mean? Why does it just do it? you
But
know?
that's what I
'Cause-
think the big point that you kind of are glossing over a little bit is like the honesty point. Like being able to be brutally self-honest is like, I know you've been walking process for a while, so I'm sure you've developed this point to now that when you support your kids, like it's very obvious, like I just need to be honest with not only them, with myself, so that then I can support myself and them to then not have to go through these consequences of realizing that my parents don't know as much as, you know what I mean? Like, but it's like that level of discipline to even recognize like, oh, I've made a mistake. Like people are just so far from that, because it's like you'd rather just admit to the lie than actually, or you know, continue with the lie than actually admit to your own mistake, or you know what I mean? So
yeah, there's like a huge fear in parents that they won't be able to control their kid.
right.
So so they'll just lie,
Yeah.
because if they let the kid believe that they don't know something, then there's like, I won't have control over them.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so we don't have that point, because it's like, think about it. Do you really have to worry about that when they're an infant? Like, does your child need to trust you when they're a baby?
They
Like, they're not going to crawl away.
yeah.
Like, they can't move.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is like, I don't need to worry when they're an infant that, oh, if they don't see me as the authority, they're not going to listen to me. Like, in what context do I need that when they're a tiny baby?
Right.
And so if I take the starting point then of now, from this moment, from the very beginning, I'm going to develop their vocabulary and explain and give context, then by the time they're at a point where they're somewhat mobile, they already understand things and they already trust me because they've seen I've been consistent.
Yeah.
So I don't need to control.
Whereas
Like,
what
so-
most people do is they're just like, I'm not gonna, it's a baby.
Right.
Like,
What
am I gonna
later they'll
explain?
learn that in school or something. So
Right,
I do
right,
see
right.
like when the kids were like 2 and stuff, we'd have scissors on the counter.
Right.
And like now, like we don't have to worry about you know, scissors or knives or something being on the counter. Like
Putting
our
away
kids-
sharp objects.
yes, because like they any more than I would worry about having a knife on the counter if you guys came over. Do you know what I mean?
You don't worry about me when I come
You know what I'm
over?
saying though? But like really, it's like I'm not, because I know you understand. Now, if there was somebody that I knew based on me observing them, they were like reckless,
Yeah.
then and they were coming over, what would I do? I'd probably be
those
like,
knives
let me
away.
put everything's away and stuff, because I know this person's a little bit crazy or silly or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, if I knew somebody was gonna be not using common sense and like reckless, I would not let that person come over and like shoot guns at my house.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I would just be like, no, you can't. Like if they're gonna be like, oh, look, I'm pointing it at the house or something, like I would not allow that person. My kids wouldn't even do that, right?
Right. I'm just imagining you just shooting them.
See, but like even with our kids, for example, like we have like BB guns and things like that, where we'll let them, like Max is obviously old enough he could shoot a BB gun. Seneca's not quite old enough yet in terms of her physical stability and so forth, but it's like I'll keep it unloaded. I'll let them hold it. I'll show them how it works, right? And I'll say, okay, now practice holding it without putting your finger on the trigger. So like by the time they get to the point where now it's time, being around a gun or a BB gun or whatever is so normal and natural that it's not like a new thing. They understand the context. And you could sit there, like I can take a pistol or a rifle and I can put a magazine into it and say, Seneca, is there a bullet in here? Is there a bullet in the chamber? Is there a round in the chamber? And she'll say, I don't know. And I say, why don't you know? She's like, because you didn't check. It's not because she's just like, I don't know. She's like, probably. She's like, yes. I'm like, how do you know? She's like, well, you have to check. So I'll take the magazine out. I'm like, what about now? She's like, I don't know. You have to open it up. So then I'll open it up. She'll look inside. Is there a bullet in there? No. Okay, let me close it. Is there a bullet now? No. Good with the magazine. Is there a bullet now? No. Why not? Because you didn't pull the slide back. Okay, but should we point it at somebody and fire the trigger anyways? No. So like she's almost 4 and she's learning these points.
Yeah.
So by the time she's 6, 7, 8, whatever age, she starts being able to actually shoot a rifle or whatever, you know, because people can do that actually physically capable at a young age. Just like they have access to their ATVs, you know, like they can go ride their ATVs around. And we're aware, we're not going to like leave the house and let them do that, because if they actually got hurt, we wouldn't be there to respond, but they're stable enough where they can do it and they understand. If we could see that they weren't, we wouldn't allow them to do that. We would educate more until they actually get it, right?
I want to go back to the point that you were making as far as like putting all these little seeds in them, and then those seeds, like as far as like structural resonance points, as far as these little seeds of conflict where they grow up and they have more and more conflict.
Yeah, it's like somebody says, I have anxiety.
Yeah. And
what do you mean you have? I mean, I actually understand because I used to have that. I get it. Like I do understand what they mean, but it's kind of like, don't you see how that doesn't actually make sense to have it? Not, but the person accepts it as, yeah, I just have anxiety. It's just such a disorder.
Yeah.
Not realizing that'd be like looking at someone's house and it's got Legos all over the floor, and you're like, oh, you must have a disorder. It's called not having the discipline to clean them up. That's it. There's nothing else. It's not like it's just you wake up in the morning, you're like, what the fuck? I cleaned all these up last night. Why is there Legos on the floor?
I have
Legoitis.
My
house has Lego disorder. Yeah, exactly. It's
like, you don't understand. Okay, Legoitis is very.
But you see how they just using that as the excuse because they don't want to apply the discipline of doing it. Right. So the excuse of I just have this disorder. I'm just always so disorganized. Like, what do you mean you're disorganized?
But back to the point of
fucking like put stuff where it goes, put stuff back where you left it. Like I'm always losing stuff. I'm like, how? If you use something and then put it back where you consistently know it's going to be, how can you have lost it? Okay, so you're allowing that.
Yeah, back to that point of like how that's developed even within a child. Like since you're contrasting what you're doing with your kids as far as taking every single point of conflict, giving the context, the understanding, and just like helping them to understand, oh, here's what the resolution is for that, every step of the way. Contrast that with the person who's feeling insecure based on their race. They've been told a story where the conflict is just inherent within everything that they do. And so it just allows, and then also imagine for a child who's been told, no, you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to hit people. And then the conflict that they get when somebody hits them, and then their parents like, well, why didn't you hit them back? You know, it's just like conflict on top of conflict, where it's just like nothing actually makes sense because you haven't given them the full context of how to interact with all these different scenarios. And it's just like you're saying, what most parents do is they just want their kids to shut up. Just shut up. Like, why are you doing this? Like, just stop. And they'll tell them the easiest, most the easiest thing to tell them in that moment to get them to stop, right? And that produces an adult who has generalized anxiety, so to speak, or who is not comfortable in their own skin, who is like constantly feeling insecure and unsure of themselves, and it must be the system doing all of this to them.
And right? What'll happen is you have people who have similar experiences and who should have all that anxiety, but because they fit into the system to a certain degree and it gives them a certain security, they don't experience the anxiety. Versus the major problem is you have all these people now, young people especially, who are coming up, who their parents were just normal fuck people, like didn't educate them effectively, but now these kids have access to all this information, and they have access to be able to see like things could be better.
Mhm.
And they have not been supported to function in a world that very clearly has no opportunity for them like it used to. So like the parents maybe grew up in a world where if you just went to if you went to school, you went to college, you could get a job, you could get employment, and it would be regular and steady, and you wouldn't have to have financial security or insecurity. Obviously, you would have to have a certain level of expectation of lifestyle, but if you were programmed with that from your parents, like you're not expecting more, so it's never a conflict.
Right.
You get your one vacation a year, you get your holidays with the family.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it's just a system, and the person is fitting into it. But now you have all these kids who like they don't feel comfortable with the restrictions that are played. And I could relate to this. Like I just was like, I want to fucking go work in an office all day and like
Yeah. Yeah.
be, you know what I mean? And like do all this bullshit that's so fake. And like I didn't want to do it. I want to be have fun and be creative and do all this other stuff.
Right.
And so the only outlet for that now is like dye your hair weird colors, like try to look unique, wear weird clothes, and like push the boundaries with sexuality and like party and have fun and just do all these things, because it's like, if I don't do that, what am I doing? I'm just bored. So it's like a way of expressing yourself in a certain way, but it's not solving the problem of like the insecurity that you feel. Like, because imagine in the back of the person's mind, what is their security when they're 70?
Yeah.
What is their security when they're 50?
Yeah.
When they're 40, 30? Like, where's the security? So this general anxiety. And then also you were never taught like how to interact with people, how to be effective in relationships and so forth. Like with our kids, like they know how to communicate with people. You know, that whole thing, that whole meme of like, well, how are you going to how are your kids going to be socialized if they don't go to school? And it's like, my kids are more effective socially
Yes.
than
Yeah.
any kids you've ever seen. Like even other kids where we'll go, like maybe there's this like a place we go to get like, grass-fed local beef at a farm or whatever, and they have like homeschooled kids. And I haven't ever been there, but the few times that like Katie has been there, like she's like the kids, they're like very quiet and like suppressed, and like just because you're homeschooled isn't the answer. It's Technotutor.
Yeah.
Because they have a high vocabulary, and we're supporting them all the time with that. With like the first time I remember when we were at a playground and I could see Max wanted to play with some kids, or whether he did or not, I was like, why don't you go play with these kids? And he was clearly like, he'd go up to him and he'd be kind of like nervous. And you might think, oh, he's just a nervous, shy child. No, he just doesn't know what the fuck to do.
Yeah.
It's like he's nervous because they don't know what to do. So I would say to him, hey, when you go up to these kids, say to them, hi, my name's Max. What's your name? And then he would do that. And then it would kind of just be nothing from there. And I would say, next time, just say like, do you want to play a game? And then ask him what kind of game do you want to play, or just suggest play tag or whatever. And so he would develop that point just by doing that, and to the point where he can go up to anybody.
Yeah.
I don't care how old they are or whatever, and like just talk to them. And it's a development point, and we've always encouraged it. And Seneka's the same way. She's not shy. Like when somebody would come up to him or her, and like they would like turn away from him, they would say like, oh, they must be so shy. I'd be like, no, they're not. And I would say to the kids, like, do you know why they're saying that? That it's like they don't know you. And you're not even introducing yourself. You're just like, oh, hi, kitty, little kid. You're like,
Yeah.
if you do that to me, I'd be like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Like it's just, you don't know that it's on you to make the child know who you are, because the child is they're still small, they're still little, they're still in a lot of ways like at effect rather to the environment, and they haven't learned that like you could just come up to them and be like, hi. But if a kid did that to you, you'd be like, what is this? That's not appropriate for a kid. You know what I mean? So like all that is within the person.
Yeah.
And so the kids will sometimes just be kind of like, they don't do that anymore, but like in the beginning. But then imagine you have one kid who does that, and then like, oh, they're shy. She's so shy. And then like that starts to become a pattern.
Right. Right.
Instead of supporting them to solve the problem. Right.
It makes me think of this, of just like our system has specifically molded or limited, or however you want to say it, stripped children into
And
what
now
the
they're
system-
literally getting kids to strip, right?
yes.
Go
But
that far, yeah.
they're literally putting these kids, limiting them in a way so that they'll fit into the system. It's like, oh, you'll fit into, like, you'll be able to do this work or this job or whatever, what the system needs as like to continue the system going. But it's a really short-sighted thing to do, obviously, because what ends up happening is when those children become adults, they don't know how to support themselves. And to a certain extent, the system wants that. But also at the same time, it's like they're not able to support anything outside of themselves. And so when, you know, the adults become elderly, then they're not getting that. They need somebody to take care of them, right? And then what ends up happening is there's no one there who actually cares or who can actually consider them, because they can't even consider all these points beyond themselves. And so it's like, you know, even looking at it from a selfish point of view, what you would want to do selfishly is take care of the next generation, take care of like everything, take into consideration as much as possible, because that's going to come and have an effect on you in the future, and obviously your children if you have children. But
Well, it's funny because you say selfishly, but it's like actually the selfish viewpoint is trying to force your children to take care of you as an adult and like care about you and respect you. You know what I mean? Like if you actually take a selfish viewpoint about it, people try, you know, why you never call me, or you should respect your parents, or you should take care of them and all this stuff, like out of guilt. And it's like, what if you actually just did what was best for your kids?
yeah,
Wouldn't that naturally, like you said, create a point where they could practically take care of you and it wouldn't be a burden? Like they don't need to be at your house like serving you meals, but they would be able to support creating a system that would take care of you as well.
You
Right.
actually create like a real relationship by that point. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
right, like you're just basing that off of like, oh, the superiority of like, oh, I'm your parent, so I deserve for you to take care of me, which is like, okay, cool. You're my parent who also treated me this way. You know what I mean? Like it did all these abusive things, and now you're just expecting me to be kind to you because you're saying that like I'm your parent.
it's just an
That's-
emotional manipulation.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And like it's cool to see the kids that are developing who have TT and they're able to talk to adults and say, you're not going to emotionally manipulate me, you know, and actually have that awareness within themselves. It's amazing, which you're not seeing the average child do it, especially because the average child's being told, oh, you have to respect authority, you have to respect your elders, and all, like being impulse with, again, these seeds of conflict, these seeds within themselves, where it's like, that's going to fuck up the constitution of this being as they become an adult, because they're not going to be able to stand up to authority because you've told them all this conflicting bullshit, right? And I guess that's the major point of like everything that we're talking about today is just, I guess, not just giving your kids, obviously giving your children the ability to sort through all that by not causing harm on them by your speech, by your actions, by everything that you're doing, but also by the lack of giving them the tools that are necessary for them to actually handle all those things. Because like you're saying, there are other homeschooling things that you could be doing, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to develop into someone who's actually able to regulate their own emotions, be able to stand up for themselves, be able to talk to other people, be able to communicate effectively, be able to understand. And that is
No, because all you're doing if you're homeschooling your kids without technotutors, you're just copying yourself into them.
Yeah.
And you're not obviously changing because you're not using technotutors. So and you're not doing DIP and all the other points. So you're still just gonna run the same programs, you know, and yes, they have done studies, as far as I understand, that show like people who are homeschooled tend to do better, but they're always showing it based on like they do better on the SAT and stuff like that. And it's like, that's just because you're not in a classroom with a bunch of other people who like you're just taking the problems with the classroom out of the picture.
Right.
Like where you're being slowed down by a bunch of people who are not where you're at. It's you're getting
Which-
more individual attention. It's cool,
Yeah.
but it's in itself, you're not going to go outside the bounds of even what the best school situation can do.
Yeah.
You're just going to be like the top student in school. Like that's the level you're going to get to, generally speaking.
Right.
You're not going to be super effective unless your parents were already super effective,
Right.
which is very, on average, not going to be the case.
Right.
Right.
And that's like, I, I don't know how else to say it other than like with TechnoTutor, you're giving your kid that foundation, that base layer, so that they can reach the standard that they can actually be not just the best kid in school, but like the best version of themselves. And again, it doesn't necessarily mean they're Usain Bolt, doesn't necessarily mean, they're Michael Phelps, other names, you get the point, but that they can actually make decisions that are best for them, best for those around them. They're actually considering much more because they have the capacity within themselves to consider those things, rather than being limited by any means, right? And obviously there's a lot that goes into it, but the simple start is the simple solution is really just TechnoTutor.
Yeah. At the end of the day, why do you care if your kid is Usain Bolt or Michael Phelps or something like that? Like,
Right.
what value does it provide?
Right.
And the only reason why you might think it's a good idea is because you would think, well, then they'll be set financially. You know what I mean? And then there's also the recognition. But like, if everybody was operating at that potential, who would give a shit? It's just entertainment.
Yeah.
Like, if there's a person who wants to push themselves in that particular field, like, cool, let them do that. But why does anyone else care?
Yeah.
Like, in fact, you actually don't really care, because if the Olympics are not on, do you think that's the only time Usain Bolt runs? You know what I mean? Like when the Olympics are on, like there's like the World Championships and there's like all these other events they're doing
The
all
rest of the
where they're
time
running
he's
and
just
racing
like, he's just sitting on his couch eating Cheetos.
you know what I mean? But not even that. I just mean like
Yeah.
there's other events happening where they're running. It's like it's just a spectacle. It's just entertainment.
Right.
And there's people who become obsessed with that form of entertainment and they know all the details and stuff. But I'm saying, as the average person, what value does it provide? So when we talk about being your best, that doesn't mean I'm excluding the possibility that your child or you can become excellent in a particular field. I'm not saying that, but it's not from the starting point of just being the best at it. It's from the starting point of what can you give?
Yeah.
And so if that's the starting point, then is Usain Bolt, like, think about it. If there's a mother who is really effective with her kids and at being a mother, and she does literally the best at it, not she's better than someone else, but like she does everything the best way, why is being the best athlete better than that?
Right. Right.
And this isn't some bullshit like, see, moms are important too. It's like, actually, I'm telling you flat out, I think the point about the person being the top runner is irrelevant.
Right.
If they want to do it, that's fine. I don't care. I'm not saying it's bad, but it's actually irrelevant in the context of anything that matters to our lives. It's just a form of entertainment.
Yeah.
Because you might think it matters, but think about the guy who's second best to Usain Bolt. Do you even know who it is?
Nope.
But isn't that person better probably than any other person that's ever run
Yeah.
in the world?
Yeah.
You don't get, like, so it's like, what is it? It's just this program of being the best at something.
Yeah.
Who cares?
And that's a good clarification of like, it's not the best as in better than
That's my point.
competition.
Like,
yeah.
That's when people say like, oh, bringing out the best in yourself. It's like, they're like, okay, what can I be the best at?
No, it's like,
no, that's not
how
what we're
can you
saying.
be your best? And
How can you be best?
Yeah.
In all ways.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
in terms of what you provide, what you give, not
Yeah.
the best.
Yeah, because being the best runner too, like all these different things that are just purely entertainment, it's just another energy experience. It's like being the best pot smoker. What does that even mean? You know what I mean? Like you're still just chasing this like energetic high to be
Right.
the best, but it's because I just see it like with people that are super into like bodybuilding, for example. Like, I'm like, what relevance does this have to your life other than this like emotional satisfaction that I did it and I became the most shredded and cut person, you know what I mean? But it's like, you're 35, you're like 33, 35-year-old woman with no kids, and like this is the pinnacle of your life. Like
And
what
how is it going to
relevance
be
is that?
relative, when you're 70 or 60 or 50? It's
Like
like
you
you're
have
going to
all these
keep doing that.
accolades, you know,
But
but for
it's
what?
exactly, it's just energy, it's just self-entertainment. And it's not really giving anything to anybody other than the form of entertainment. But it's like, how many bodybuilders do you even know of? It's like, what does it
Arnold
matter?
Schwarzenegger.
Yeah, and it's like, seriously, like, he's old, right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't really, and then yeah, that's a whole nother topic, right? But what else is there? Do you guys want to wrap it up now? I don't know.
Yeah, we
What
can
else?
start to wrap it up.
Yeah.
I think just contrasting that with like what does best mean in the context of uh, us as individuals and society. Best is when you can make decisions that not only are good for yourself, good for those around you, but also it takes into consideration what we're here on this planet for, you know, like taking into consideration it's life is not just about irrelevant entertainment or just one person's individual idea of happiness. And I'm saying idea of happiness because I don't mean that you can't be happy. I just mean like this idea of happiness where people chase traveling or jumping off of cliffs or video games or whatever their idea of happiness is. Like, actually consider as a parent, as a mother, as a father, like when your child develops into the human being that you always wished that you could be, you know, like, or you wish that your parents were, or whatever, like when you can see that they are a leader to themselves, that they are confident in themselves, that they actually know how to do things, that they actually consider others, that they're actually kind, like all the things that you would look at and say, these are great qualities for any human being. Doesn't that make you, as their parent or somebody who had a hand in that, doesn't that make you happy? Wouldn't it make you happy to know that you've played a part in creating a society where everyone is taken care of, where there's not a single person who is starving, where there's not a single person who's being abused because you've actually done the work? Like, doesn't it feel fucking amazing when you let's say in the context of doing a sport, you put in the work, you go run, you run every day for a year or whatever it is, and then you actually perform better than you've ever performed on a race or whatever the case may be, right? Doesn't it feel like, hey, I fucking did that shit. I know how much work went into this. I know what I had to do to create this. Well, why don't we take that to the world? Like so often people are just like, oh, you know, it'd be nice if the world could be like this, but they're just like kind of leaving it up to like, imagine if you thought you could just like, "Hey, it'd be nice if I could win that race." And then you never ran, you never prepared for it. You just like, maybe.
But then you actually like entertain the idea that someday it's going to happen.
Right. Like that's
Like,
then you
well,
get
as long as
upset
I
that
maintain a positive attitude.
Yeah.
then you get upset that Usain Bolt beat you, but you never, you know what I mean? Like
it's not
you're,
fair.
Like,
it's
It's
not,
not fair.
I
He
could
had
have beat
different
him if I
circumstances.
trained.
it
If
just
I had trained,
reminds
I
me,
could have beat him.
right, exactly. But it's like those people that will argue like, oh, I'm not going to have kids because this world is just like a dismal, you know, place, and it's just not fit to like raise a child anymore. But it's like then those people become the most self-interested and do not give a fuck about anything other than purely like accumulating energy, you
See,
know?
it's the excuse of, I just want to actually continue that and not take responsibility. That's a great point.
Right.
Yeah.
Like you're not actually okay. It's like, okay, so then what are you going to do to then not make this world a dismal, you know, place that you don't want to raise
It's like,
kids
oh,
in? It's
I'm
like,
just going to pursue energy and just kind of be self-interested and just do what everyone else is doing.
I'm just gonna remain
I'm
a
just going to
child for the rest of my
continue
life.
perpetuating this
Yeah.
problem.
So that people in the future won't want to have kids either. Yeah. So let's look at it like this. What if instead of trying to be the best at something that's just arbitrary, what if everybody took on the point of, I'm going to be the best at creating a world that's best for all.
Mm,
So meaning within myself, the best that I can do towards it, not about beating somebody else, but like I'm actually going to look and examine all the points that's holding me back from participating in that. And whether this person becomes the president or this person is, you know, something that you don't see as having a special point, like accolades and recognition. Like you're just really good at raising your kids to be effective and supported. Why is one better than the other? You only need one person to be the president.
Mhm.
We have this worship point where it's like they're special. But if you actually took it as, no, it's actually the most fucking responsibility. So prepare yourself to the point where you can take on whatever is needed based on your skill set and what you're practically able to do to be the best in that area and push yourself within it. That's the real point. That would be cool if everybody took that point on
Yeah.
as like, instead of having the poster of like the Usain Bolt winning the gold medal, it would be a metaphor of me pushing myself within what are my limitations that are in front of me right now to actually doing what is best.
yeah.
That's the key.
Yeah. Man, imagine like when the world gets to that place where you can focus creatively on what you actually want, because it's like, oh, you know, everyone's taken care of and everyone knows that, and like everyone operates with this in mind, and you can actually focus on what you want. Then as you're developing, like as a child is developing, the parents can say to that child, you know, when they get into like their teens, like, hey, you like this, or you're really good at this, or whatever, these are your talents, or these are your interests, why don't you study with so and so, because they are really effective in
Or imagine like
this
the
thing.
kid, you don't even need to fucking say that.
Yeah.
The kid comes to you and is like, I really want to fucking build robots. I just need your help finding somebody. They wouldn't even need your help.
Right.
They'd
Like,
already know because they've already been studying
I-
and they know who the top robotics person is. And they're like calling them and emailing them. You don't even have to fucking be involved.
exactly.
Because
It's
that's like, isn't that what you expect Bill Gates would do? You
right.
think he was like asking his parents permission? Like, can you help me talk to something? Like they were like, why the fuck did you leave Harvard? He's like, yeah, I'm over that. I'm doing this other thing. They're like, are you crazy? He's like, whatever.
Yeah,
You know
exactly.
what I mean? Like he doesn't, because he had a high vocabulary. He didn't need permission from somebody.
Right. Exactly. And so let's create that. Like we have the capability of doing that today. It will take some time, right? There is physical effort, physical time involved, but we have the capability of doing that. There's no excuse to not do it. And so that's what we're here to do. And I mean, if you're listening to this, you've either joined us already, or you should join us, especially if you made it this far. But yeah, like I guess that's it for me. Did you want to add anything to that?
No, we'll see
All
you
right.
guys next week.
Ciao.
Me.